Picture a kitchen counter in 1955, almost nothing on it. Maybe a ceramic canister set near the wall, a dish towel folded over the edge of the sink, and that's it. No tower of appliances, no charging cables draped over the backsplash, no stack of mail that somehow migrated from the front door, just a clean, open surface that looked ready to be used. That image feels incredibly calm, and if you've ever stood in your own kitchen and felt the opposite, felt the low hum of visual noise that follows you even when nothing urgent is wrong, you've probably wondered what the difference actually was. You might have told yourself she was more disciplined, more organized by nature, that women back then just cared more, or had more time, or had some kind of domestic instinct that got lost somewhere between then and now. But here's what's closer to the truth. She didn't have better habits than you. She had a better house. Not better in the way of bigger or newer or more beautiful, better in a specific practical way that almost never gets talked about. Her house was arranged, physically, structurally, by the limits of what it held and how it was built. To make order easier than disorder, the house itself did quiet work. It created results that today's women are expected to manufacture through willpower alone, with no structural help at all in homes that are actively working against them. That's not a small distinction. That's the whole argument. And once you see it, the guilt that follows you from room to room starts to make a lot less sense. If this is the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about, old systems, why things felt different, what got quietly lost, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. And before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your state, your country, even your city in the comments. And while you're there, did the house you grew up in feel more manageable than the one you live in now? That question is more relevant than it sounds. Now back to that counter. The 1950s kitchen counter was nearly empty not because the woman who kept it was a minimalist with an aesthetic philosophy. Minimalism as a lifestyle wasn't something anyone was practicing or naming. The counter was empty because there was almost nothing designed to live on it. The small appliance industry was in its infancy. The average kitchen in 1955 might have had a toaster, maybe a percolator. That was often the full extent of it. There was no instant pot waiting to be put away and never quite making it back into the cabinet. No air fryer taking up a third of the workspace. No knife block, no fruit bowl overflowing onto the cutting board, no decorative items multiplying across every flat surface. The counter was a working surface. That was its only job. And because that was its only job, it stayed clear almost automatically. You used it, you cleaned it, it was done. The surface reset itself because nothing was permanently assigned to live there. That single physical fact changed how the whole kitchen functioned. When a surface is clear, you can see when something doesn't belong on it. When a surface is already covered, one more thing blends right in. Clutter doesn't announce itself on a cluttered surface. It announces itself on a clean one. The empty counter was, without anyone framing it this way, a detection system, a visual baseline that made disorder visible the moment it appeared. Modern kitchens have more counter space than 1950s kitchens did. They also have more things permanently living on that counter space. More appliances, more gadgets, more decorative objects that were bought with good intentions and now just occupy real estate. The net result for many people is a kitchen that feels more crowded than a smaller kitchen with a fraction of the appliances would have felt 60 years ago. She wasn't tidier, she had less to manage. Those are not the same thing. And treating them as the same thing is where the guilt comes from. The counter was just the beginning, the same logic. Limits built into the physical space, order created by what the house chose not to hold, ran through every room. And it started with something even more fundamental than what sat on the surfaces. It started with how much those homes were designed to contain it all. The average American home in 1955 was roughly 1,000 square feet. Today, that number sits closer to 2,500. And the storage inside those older homes was not just smaller in total. It was smaller by design in a way that had a specific practical consequence that almost no one talks about. When they romanticize mid-century living, you could not keep what did not fit. That sounds obvious. But think about what it actually meant in daily life. A coat closet near the front door held coats. When it was full, 4 coats for a family of 4, maybe a set of scarves and gloves on the shelf above. It was full. There was no overflow option, no second closet down the hall, no hooks added to the back of every bedroom door, no storage unit rented off Route 9 to hold the things the house couldn't absorb. When the closet was full, something had to leave before something new came in. Not as a rule anyone wrote down, or a decluttering method anyone read about in a magazine. As physics, the door wouldn't close otherwise. That physical limit was a system, one of the most effective organizational systems ever used in an American home, and nobody called it a system. It was just the closet. Walk-in closets became standard in American homes in the 1980s and grew from there. Double walk-ins, built-in shelving, shoe racks that fold out from the wall. And then when those filled up too, the garage became a storage room. And when the garage filled up, the self-storage industry quietly became a $40 billion business. Americans now rent external space to hold what their already large homes cannot contain. The house stopped pushing back. It kept expanding to say yes, and the accumulation followed. Did you grow up in a smaller house? Think about whether it actually felt more manageable than the space you live in now. A lot of people find, when they think honestly about it, that the smaller house did feel more manageable, not despite the limits but because of them. The limit was the system. Remove the limit and you also remove the system, whether you meant to or not. The same logic showed up somewhere more specific and more telling than the coat closet. It showed up in a single kitchen drawer. Most 1950s homes had one drawer designated for the things that didn't have a better place. A ball of string, a few rubber bands, a spare key, maybe a birthday candle and a coupon clipped from the Sunday paper. One drawer, that was the boundary. When it filled up, something came out. The drawer was finite and everyone in the house knew it and treated it that way. That drawer still exists in modern homes, except now there are several of them. One in the kitchen, one in the hallway, one in the home office, one in the mudroom if the house has one. And beyond the drawers, there are flat surfaces that have become permanent junk repositories. The corner of the counter, the top of the microwave, the edge of the stairs where things get left to be carried up and never are. The single junk drawer was a container with a lid, metaphorically speaking. When it was the only one, it stayed manageable. When it multiplied into 6, the concept of a boundary disappeared entirely. The 1950s housewife was not more disciplined about clutter. She was living in a house that physically could not hold as much of it. The house did the discipline for her. When the closet was full, she felt it. When the drawer was full, she saw it. The feedback was immediate and physical, not a vague feeling of being behind, that she had to interpret and act on with her own motivation. Modern homes have so much capacity that the feedback arrives late, sometimes very late. After years of slow accumulation, in the form of a room that suddenly feels impossible to deal with, and a person standing in the middle of it wondering how it got this way. It got this way because the house never said stop. The house that pushed back produced order without requiring extraordinary effort. The house that always said yes produced accumulation without anyone making a single dramatic decision to let things go. But the house wasn't only managing what came in, it was also managing something that modern homes have almost completely stopped doing. It was managing when the day ended. There was a moment in the 1950s home that doesn't exist in most houses today. It happened after dinner, usually within 30 minutes of the last plate being cleared. The dishes got washed, the counters got wiped, the stovetop got a quick pass with a damp cloth, and then the kitchen light went off. Not metaphorically, literally. The light went off, the woman walked out, and the kitchen was closed for the night. She wasn't doing this because she was compulsive about cleanliness or because some household manual told her to. She did it because the next morning depended on it. And she knew that from experience in a way that felt less like discipline and more like common sense. A clean kitchen at night meant a functional kitchen in the morning. The coffee could be made without moving things out of the way first. Breakfast could be prepared on a clear surface. The day could start without the previous day still sitting there waiting to be dealt with. That closing ritual, small, practical, maybe 15 minutes on a quiet evening, was a stopping point built into the structure of the day. The house had a moment when it was finished, and that moment mattered in a way that went beyond the dishes. When the kitchen was physically reset and the main living space was tidy, there was a psychological permission that came with it. And just like that, the work was done. Not done in the sense of everything being perfect or every task completed, but done in the sense that the house had reached its baseline and the evening could be something other than more housework. She could sit, she could read, she could be present with her family without the mess pressing in at the edges of her attention, making low-level demands she couldn't quite name. Modern homes rarely offer that permission, and a significant part of why they don't comes down to architecture. Open-plan living became the dominant design preference in American homes from the 1990s onward. Knock out the wall between the kitchen and the living room. Let the spaces flow into each other. Make it feel larger, brighter, more connected. There are real advantages to that layout, and plenty of people love it genuinely. But it removed something that the older, compartmentalized home provided without anyone realizing it was providing it. When the kitchen is a separate room with a door or an entryway, that creates even a soft visual boundary, you can leave it. You walk out and it is behind you. When the kitchen is open to the living room, the dining area, and often the front hall as well, it is never fully behind you. The unwashed pan on the stove is visible from the couch. The cluttered counter shares the same visual field as the television, the bookshelf, the place where you're trying to relax. The mess doesn't stay in the kitchen. It comes with you into every part of the ground floor and sits there at the edge of your vision all evening. There is no moment when that kitchen is closed. There is no light to turn off that signals anything. The open-plan home is, by design, always a little bit on. Is there a point in your day when your home actually feels finished, when you could sit down and feel genuinely done rather than just tired enough to stop? If you're finding it hard to answer yes, the layout of your home may have more to do with that than your habits do. The 1950s kitchen closed because it was a room. The evening reset worked because it had a clear end state that was visible and achievable in a short window of time. Wipe, wash, turn off the light. Done. The task was defined, the completion was obvious, and the reward was immediate. A quiet house that held its shape until morning. Compare that to the modern version of the same impulse, which often looks like standing in an open kitchen at 9 in the evening, looking at the connected living space, calculating how long everything would take, deciding it's too much for right now, and walking away with the low guilt of an incomplete thing still running somewhere in the background. Not because she is lazier than the woman in 1955, because the house gives her no natural stopping point, no defined end state, no moment when done is clearly and visibly done. The house in 1955 knew when to stop. It was built in a way that made stopping possible, visible, and worth doing. The rhythm of the day had a close. That close wasn't a personality trait or a discipline habit. It was a function of walls, rooms, and a light switch at the end of a short hallway. The house shaped the rhythm, but it also shaped something less obvious. Something that sits underneath the counters and the closets and the evening reset and holds all of it together. It shaped how much she was expected to know, track, and manage at any given moment. And that inventory of knowledge was itself a system that modern homes quietly dismantled without replacing. She knew what was in every cabinet. That sentence sounds simple, it isn't. Knowing what your home contains, actually knowing, without having to open 3 drawers to find out, without discovering duplicates of things you forgot you owned, without pulling everything out of a shelf to locate one item that should have been easy to find, is not a passive result of being organized. It is the result of owning a quantity of things that a human mind can reasonably hold and track. The 1950s housewife knew her inventory because her inventory was knowable. It was small enough to fit inside her head. And that mental map was itself one of the most functional systems in her house. Open the medicine cabinet in a home from 1955. A bar of soap, a tin of talcum powder, a safety razor, and a small brush. A bottle of aspirin, maybe a tube of cold cream on the shelf below. 5 or 6 items, all of them used regularly, all of them visible, all of them with a specific place they returned to after use. She knew what was in there without looking, because there was never enough in there to forget. Open the average bathroom cabinet today. Products purchased and used twice. Serums recommended by someone online that didn't work but weren't thrown away. 3 versions of the same moisturizer in different stages of being finished. medications whose expiration dates passed during a different presidential administration, hair tools with cords that tangle around everything else, backup supplies of things that already have backups. The cabinet holds so much that navigating it requires a small excavation every time something is needed, and half of what's in there hasn't been touched in months. That bathroom cabinet is not a storage problem, it is a knowledge problem. When a space contains more than the mind can casually track, the mind stops trying. Things go in and don't come out. Duplicates accumulate because the original couldn't be located. The space becomes a kind of fog, full, technically organized, but functionally opaque. And that fog spreads. It spreads to the kitchen cabinets, to the bedroom closet, to the garage, to the storage boxes stacked in a spare room that nobody opens anymore, because nobody quite remembers what's in them. And the effort of finding out feels larger than whatever reward might be inside. The 1950s housewife didn't have a system for managing her inventory. She just didn't have enough inventory to need one. The limit, again, was doing the work. There's another piece of this that the older home handled differently, and it has to do with visibility. Much of what the 1950s home held was in plain sight. Hooks on the wall near the back door held the coats and bags that actually got used daily. A small shelf in the kitchen held the spices and the oil and the salt right there where cooking happened. The bathroom had one or two items on the edge of the sink because those were the things used every single morning. Visible storage wasn't a design trend, it was the default, partly because there wasn't enough closed cabinetry to hide everything away, and it had a practical effect that's easy to underestimate. When things are visible, you see when something doesn't belong. You see when the shelf is getting crowded and something needs to move. You see what you actually use versus what you're only keeping out of vague obligation. The visible home gave her constant, low-effort feedback about the state of her space. Nothing could quietly pile up behind a closed door because most things didn't live behind closed doors. Modern homes are built around concealment. Cabinet doors on everything. Drawers that close smoothly and hide whatever's inside. Built-in storage designed to make clutter disappear from view. And disappearing from view is not the same as being resolved. Hidden clutter is still clutter. It just stops sending signals. It becomes comfortable to ignore. And ignored clutter grows at a pace that only becomes alarming when the cabinet finally won't close or the drawer jams halfway. The house that made things visible made them manageable. The house that made things easy to hide made them easy to forget, and forgetting is where accumulation begins. None of this means the 1950s housewife had an easier life in any broad sense. She had real constraints, real limitations, and a social structure that placed the entire weight of the home on her shoulders without much acknowledgement or choice. That part is not the lesson, and it is not what's worth retrieving. What is worth retrieving is the structural logic, the counter that held nothing permanently, the closet that couldn't hold more than it held, the kitchen that closed at night, the cabinet whose contents she knew without looking. Those were not habits she developed through superior character. They were conditions the house created for her, almost automatically. By being smaller and holding less and keeping things in sight, the house you live in now can be made to do some of that same work. Not by buying more storage bins or downloading another organizing app, or committing to a 6-week decluttering challenge, but by reducing what you ask your house to hold, by giving one surface a permanent limit, by making one cabinet visible, by finding the moment in your evening when the kitchen can be closed, even if it doesn't have a door, even if the light switch is 20 feet away, and letting that moment mean something. The room was never magic. The limits were. And limits, unlike discipline, don't depend on how tired you are at the end of the day. If this way of looking at old systems is something you want more of, subscribe. There's a lot here that didn't get passed down, and some of it is genuinely worth finding again.